Now, owning a flat is just as easy as owning a house. Okay, actually that's not true. And today I'm sharing with you some of the shocking home truths that no estate agents will ever tell you. I'm speaking from my own personal experience and I hope this video helps you. That buying a flat is sometimes the only option for people to get onto the housing ladder. Speaking from my own personal experience, I couldn't afford anything other than a flat when I was purchasing it. I was on a single income and there was just no way I would have ever been able to purchase a house by myself and on that salary at the time. And for a lot of people, buying a flat is still the very only option, especially if you are in more expensive cities such as London. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer. I just wanted to share my honest experience of what you are getting yourself into with a flat, and also various things you should be looking for when you are going through that process. Not all flats are the same, but these are the things that estate agents will cover up and not tell you, and it is a shocking industry. Leasehold is really difficult. So yeah, let's get stuck into it and hopefully you learn something that's really useful in this video for you. So coming in at number one as one of the worst home truths about owning a flat, and that is literally that you do not own one single brick. You may think that you own your flat within a block, but that is absolutely not true. The only thing you actually own is a lease agreement between yourself and the freeholder. The lease agreement pertains everything that is in relation to your property, from service charges to alterations, ground rent and so on. And it's actually no similar to having a rental agreement, but it's just a lease agreement and you pay a monthly mortgage fee. And when I owned my own flat, it took me a long time to realise that this was the case. And when you kind of get it into your head that you actually don't own the property as such, it just doesn't feel like it's yours, and it just didn't sit well with me when I found that out. And a lot of people who are buying flats don't realise this, but yeah, you literally don't own anything. Number two, one of the worst things about owning a flat, which you obviously know about when you go through the process, is service charges. Now, service charges is the one thing you do not get with a freehold property, which is a house. Generally speaking, and those are the charges that you pay annually or monthly, and it goes towards the maintenance of the property and the surrounding sort of area. Service charges can go to lots of different things, so on our annual accounts it was literally down to everything like the stamps that they send you the invoices with. So it would include like if you had lifts to be serviced or communal cleaning, electricity, communal charges, and any sort of maintenance that's required, say it's a new roof or window cleaning, guttering, literally everything. And what often happens is they will invoice it prior to the works completing. So they'll do it sort of like before the 12-month period, which means that sometimes you'll pay for stuff which actually hasn't been carried out in that year. Now they're meant to carry those charges on in your sort of accounts the following year, but whether they actually do that, I don't know. But the worst thing about service charges is they will increase over time, and obviously it depends what your lease agreement says. But yeah, service charges, if they increase in line with RPI, you're in for a really bad time during inflation. And whilst people are talking about mortgage increases at the moment, no one mentions service charges. And honestly, it's one of the worst things. I used to hate having the invoices through the post, which became very regular in the end. You'd never know where you stand, and some of the times they will invoice it up front and expect that payment within that month. Some may allow you to pay it monthly, but it really does vary who your freeholder is. But yes, service charges are a huge thing, and often mortgage companies don't actually factor into affordability. And you've just got to be prepared that service charges will increase, and whether you're able to afford that with your mortgage repayments as well. And going back to number one, where we said that, you know, you only own a lease agreement, you don't actually own a brick, and that is very true of alterations. So in your property, it's very likely you will have to ask or request your freeholder for any alterations you want to make. Obviously painting and, you know, decorative works are absolutely fine, unless maybe you're in a grade listed building, you might need to check. But if you are looking to, you know, knock down walls, add a new kitchen, and especially if you want to request pets, everything has to be done with an inquiry, and with an inquiry you have to pay for that. Everything has to go for your freeholder. You may want a dog, but your freeholder might come back and say no. I've also heard of other instances where they have to put in an inquiry for pets literally every year. So it really does vary from freeholder to freeholder. But generally speaking, do not ever do anything to your property until you've asked for permission. And it seems absolutely ridiculous, but this just consolidates the fact that you don't own the property, and some of these inquiries and the forms and the costs of them are really high. So yeah, it's just worth bearing that in mind as well, that it can be similar to, you know, rentals where you're not allowed pets, and some freeholders will say no. So you do need to be aware of that, especially if you've got a dog and you've got a cat and you're currently going through that process of purchasing a flat. Now, a huge drawback of having a flat is the length of the leasehold. And this obviously varies from flat to flat. Leaseholds obviously vary in length. Lots of new leases these days, if it's like a new build property, are sort of 999 years. And where you really need to start worrying is when a lease hits 90 years. But I personally would never ever touch a leasehold property that didn't have more than 100 years, because I know how much it can cost to extend your lease. And what basically happens if you let a lease run its course is that, say you didn't pay for it to be renewed, that goes back to the freeholder. And that again comes into the fact that you don't own anything other than a lease agreement. And the longer you leave a lease without renewing it, past that 90-year mark, the more expensive it can get, because a thing called marriage value comes into play. Now, lease extensions again are going to really vary in cost. It totally depends on your freeholder and how much they charge. But generally speaking, you're looking at something over 10 grand, anything under 10 grand, and you know, you're kind of lucky. But it has to be done through a formal lease extension. Never go through the informal route, because they can put some really nasty clauses into that. But yeah, you've got to be aware of your length of lease. So if an estate agent cannot provide this to you at the time of viewing a property, just absolutely leave it. It's probably because they're trying to cover something up. And a lot of times, if you see a flat that comes onto the market and it's like super cheap, it's probably because it's got a lease defect, and that's because it's got a very minimal amount of years left on the lease. So just do not touch anything with a barge pole that has got less than 100 years. But of course, you do need to be mindful about how long you're going to stay in a property, and as you edge closer to extending the lease. Now, purchasing and selling a flat or a leasehold property, costs with solicitors are going to be slightly more, which is just ridiculous. Flats take so much longer to go through than houses, and because they have a lot of additional work that comes with them, especially due to the lease, this is why the costs are higher with a solicitor, and why the length of time for your property going through is going to take longer. So houses generally take about 2 to 3 months, maybe 2 on a very good month, although that can be quite rare these days. And with a flat, you're absolutely not looking at anywhere less than 3 months, unless it might be a cash buyer and you've got no problems with your lease at all. I mean, that's definitely not true of my experience. When I purchased my flat, it took 5 months to go through, and then when I sold my flat, it took 9 months. And you know, it can be so much longer, especially if you've got to have deed of variations, which I'll come on to in a minute, and also lease extensions. So you do need to be mindful that the flat process is going to take longer, and it's also going to cost you a little bit more to do so as well. Now, it feels a bit backwards mentioning this now, but it's something I wasn't aware of, and it's something that no estate agent and no solicitor tells you at the time of purchasing a flat. And the fact is, when you sell a leasehold property, it does entail a lot more costs than selling a house. So you still have your traditional solicitor's fees, which I've already mentioned are going to cost a little bit more, but you also have to gather something called an LP1 form, or otherwise known as a management pack. And this is basically a 2-page document that outlines everything to do with your lease and the property, service charges, ground rent, etc. And normally your freeholder would fill this in, but you may also have a managing agent that fills it in. So the LP1 form is a 2-page document, and obviously you can't get anything done for free these days, and this is why freeholders are freeholders. They hold the leases to make money. So it's a 2-page document. It's literally not many questions. They should already have this information really accessible, and it cost me £840 for a 2-page document which was literally filled in super quickly. So firstly, I had to send my form to the managing agent. They charged me £240. They then said there's 2 questions we can't fill in, the freeholder has to fill them in. 2 questions, they charged me £600. £600. And by this stage, because so much had happened with selling the flat, I literally just wanted it to go through and I just had to pay it. It's not legally binding that you have to have it done. However, a lot of solicitors will require it and a lot of buyers will want the LP1 form to be completed. It's got lots of important information in it and I would personally never purchase a flat without having that information first. So yeah, it's very, very expensive, and I had other costs that I had to incur as well during the process, mostly to do with my lease. If there is a clause in your lease that the buyer doesn't like, they may want you to do a deed of variation. Now, the deed of variation for this was regarding flooring. I won't go into too much detail about it because it's very, very niche about what happened to me. But the deed of variation was going to be like £1,000 plus. And luckily I managed to do an indemnity policy for it, which was around £70. So yeah, there's lots of different things that may come into play, and reading a lease from page to page is just something you don't do when you're purchasing a flat. It's your first time property and you just don't understand anything about it, and I certainly didn't because I just wanted the property to go through. But if you are purchasing a flat, please, please, please read it with a fine-tooth comb, and if there's anything you're not sure about, Google it, go in the National Leasehold group on Facebook and ask the question, because they word things in really weird ways, and I know no one reads terms and conditions, but honestly, it may save you a lot of money if you do it. Now, a big problem with flats today is ground rent. Now, ground rent is something that you pay annually and it goes directly to the freeholder. Ground rent, again, is going to vary from property to property. Some flats that have had brand new lease extensions, a lot of them have had their ground rent reduced to a peppercorn, which is basically nothing, or a nominal fee such as £1 a year. High levels or onerous levels of ground rent are a real issue today because mortgage lenders are not wanting to lend, because anything over £250 is classed as an AST, which is an assured short hold tenancy, and it basically means that if you were to forfeit on paying your ground rent payments, it becomes easier for the freeholder to take the property from you, meaning that the mortgage lender and yourself would be left with nothing to recoup those fees. So because of that, mortgage lenders are understandably quite worried about it. Now, this issue came up with my flat, and I was going to have to go through with a deed of variation with my freeholder, which basically puts a clause in to say the ground rent is not going to exceed £250, and this was going to cost me around £15,000. Okay, who has spare £15,000 when you are in your 20s? So understandably, I just literally went into meltdown. It was just honestly awful. I felt like I was never going to sell the flat, and the more I looked into it, I was increasingly worried, and it was looking likely that I was going to have to sell to a cash buyer. Through some stroke of luck, I managed to give them an indemnity policy, which literally cost me £50. I'll never ever forget that day when they accepted it. I sold the flat back in 2022, now in 2023, and mortgage lenders have become even hotter on this topic. I've heard of instances where people have got ground rent of £150 and mortgage lenders aren't lending, and they're really stomping down now on indemnity policies, and some don't even accept them now. So I was very, very lucky at the time, but ground rent is a huge issue. Lots of them rise with the rate of RPI, or they increase at a certain percentage every sort of 5 or 10 years. There is a leasehold reform which may come into effect in November of this year, but I really don't know too much about that at the moment. It's been shelved for a number of years through sort of lockdown, so there is hope that ground rent will be changed in the future, but for now, if you are purchasing a flat, you must find out what the ground rent is before. I'd find out what it is before you review the flat, and then if anything does have a ground rent of, you know, I'd even say like over 150, I'd really tread very carefully because it's going to be super difficult, and a lot of people can't afford deed of variations or lease extensions, and deed of variations and lease extensions also take quite a long time to go through, which is going to add more months and more time to you purchasing the property. And the last one which I really wanted to mention, and again I will keep mentioning that it does vary from flat to flat, a lot of the time you can end up dealing with quite a lot of people. In our flat we had a freeholder which we would only contact for alterations and inquiries, ground rent, and then we had our managing agent, and the managing agents would charge us for the service charges. If we had issues with the flats, if they weren't being cleaned, etc., we would contact them, and virtually everything day-to-day wise was done through them. And most of the times they didn't seem to talk to each other, which caused a lot of problems. Now you may end up getting a really good managing agent, but a lot of them out there are literally just in it for the money, from my experience. And if things aren't being done in your property and you've paid for it, do kick up a fuss about it, because that is what they're being paid for, and service charges are already super expensive, so you want to make sure the works are being done. And if there are big jobs that are being done, they should be getting at least 3 quotes for works, which never ever happened from my experience. And one final word on freeholders. From my experience and from what my solicitor told me, freeholders are virtually uncapped, which is why they literally can charge ridiculous amounts of money for things like deed of variations, lease extensions and inquiries. And that is probably the worst thing ever about leasehold properties, is you are at the mercy of landlords. And basically if you want something done, if you're trying to sell your flat, if you're trying to get a lease extension, it's going to cost you a lot of money and there's virtually nothing you can do about it. Now I hope that you've taken something from this video today, whether you're selling your leasehold property, whether you're purchasing one. Leasehold is a completely different ballgame to buying a house. I virtually knew nothing about leasehold properties when I purchased my flat. I wish I had. I wish I'd done more research, but back then there was really no information about rising ground rent levels and all of the nitty-gritty bits that go into owning a flat. There's lots of videos out there, lots of blog posts out there about people that talk about leasehold properties, but not one of them seem to have actually owned a leasehold flat. This is all from my own experience, and it's things that estate agents are not going to tell you. So I really hope you found this video useful today. If you do have any other questions about leasehold properties or things you're really not sure about, please leave me a comment below, as I've got a wealth of experience about leasehold, and if I can't help you, I'll find someone that does. I've also linked a couple of blog posts below which you might find helpful. I've written a lot about leasehold over the last year, and if there is anything I've missed or maybe a topic you'd like me to cover, please let me know. But I hope you enjoyed watching it today. Please do give it a thumbs up if you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you soon.